inadmissibility of weapons of any kind being placed in outer space. In other words, we're adding to the roof the US and Japan put forward. We're adding all of the other components of a house. This is what the overwhelming majority of states expects of the Security Council. We call on all responsible states engaged in outer space activities to support our proposal. We have 15 delegations who today must shoulder a special responsibility, not to take the step which, instead of achieving Paris, will sow division and fragmentation. The Security Council shouldn't play along with the cunning initiatives being put forward by our US and Japanese colleagues. Instead, it should look for commonalities and work to resolve real, not hypothetical problems. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation and pass the floor to China.
President, outer space is a global commons that has a major bearing on the security and well-being of all humankind. In recent years, threats and challenges to outer space security have been increasing, and the risk of the weaponization of outer space has been on the rise. Preventing an arms race in outer space and ensuring its use for peaceful purposes is a priority and urgent task of the international community. Outer space security is of vital interest to 193 member states. It is also a highly technical and specialized issue. China has always advocated that discussions dedicated to this issue should be held on platforms such as the Conference on Disarmament, the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, and the First Committee of the GA, among others. This is in line with the division of labor and the respective mandates among UN bodies. It is also conducive to safeguarding the general membership's right to participate in deliberations on an equal footing. Meanwhile, taking into account the linkage between the issue of outer space security and the maintenance of international peace and security, as well as the strong will of some membership, China has participated in a constructive spirit in the discussions and consultations of the Council on this issue. In this process, we have always maintained that as the Council considers the issue of outer space security and proposes to take action, it should pay attention to and reflect the general concerns and voices of the international community. And it should accommodate the views of all parties as much as possible and strive for consensus so as to support and complement the discussions on the relevant platforms. China agrees with the content of the current Council draft relating to 1967 Outer Space Treaty. However, these elements represent only one aspect of the governance of outer space security, and the draft should be supplemented with other substantive elements. Given that the GA resolutions on outer space in recent years, we have made proposals to amend the draft resolution proposing inclusions of such elements as calling upon all states to take measures to prevent the placement of weapons in outer space. I want to emphasize it includes all types of weapons. And the early elaboration of legally binding multilateral agreements. I would like to point out that the amendment is not a new text, but elements from a GA resolution supported by over 2/3 of member states. I believe that the incorporation and adoption of the amendment will make the current draft more complete, comprehensive, and balanced. China calls on all members to vote in favor of the amendment. I thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China. Members of the Council have before them a proposed amendment contained in document S/2024/323 submitted by China and the Russian Federation to the text of the draft resolution contained in document S/2024/302. Rule 36 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure states, inter alia, the following. When an amendment adds to or deletes from the text of a motion or draft resolution, that amendment shall be voted on first. Accordingly, I intend to put the proposed amendment to the vote first. Will those in favour of the proposed amendment contained in document S/2024/323 please raise their hand? Those against? Abstentions? So, thank you. The result of the voting is as follows. 7 votes in favour, 7 votes against, 1 abstention. The proposed amendment has not been adopted, having failed to obtain the required number of votes. I pass the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. Japan and the United States sought to develop a resolution that could be adopted unanimously. For that reason, we focus on a narrow topic, preventing the placement of weapons of mass destruction in outer space. Over the past weeks, Japan and the United States have made considerable compromises in the name of reaching consensus. And so it was unfortunate that Russia and China put forward an amendment that seeks to divide us. An amendment with language that already 8 Council members did not vote in support of during the last year's first committee. Let me be clear. We are committed to maintaining outer space for peaceful purposes. We have included many paragraphs in our resolution focused on preventing an arms race in outer space, and have emphasized the need for further measures to that end. All of you know our position on China's proposal for a treaty in the Conference on Disarmament. It is not verifiable. It would fail to cover threats like Russia's destruction 2021 test of an anti-satellite missile from the ground. And it is inconsistent with the UN Charter, which permits the use of force for self-defense where authorized by the Security Council. As our Russian and Chinese colleagues have said, the Security Council should not seek to get ahead of ongoing discussions in the General Assembly or Conference on Disarmament, but rather seek to complement and support them. For this reason, Japan and United States voted no on this amendment. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan. It is my understanding that the Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution contained in document S/2024/302. I shall put the draft resolution to a vote now. Will those in favour of the draft resolution contained in document S/2024/302 please raise their hand? Don't worry. Thank you. Those against? Abstentions? The result of the voting is as follows. 13 votes in favour, 1 vote against, 1 abstention. So here it is. The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council. I now give the floor to those members who wish to take the floor. I pass the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. I just returned from a trip to Japan where I had the honor of visiting Nagasaki. the last place to ever experience the atomic bomb. It was a reminder of our profound responsibility to prevent the scourge of war and ensure that no place experiences the horror of nuclear weaponry ever again. Unfortunately, today, Russia abandoned that responsibility. Of course, this is not the first time Russia has undermined the global nonproliferation regime. Over the past few years, Russia has irresponsibly invoked dangerous nuclear rhetoric and walked away from several of its arms control obligations. It has remained unwilling to engage in substantive discussions around arms control or risk reduction, and it has defended and even enabled dangerous proliferators. Now Russia has vetoed a straightforward resolution that affirms a legally binding obligation under the Outer Space Treaty that we should not be putting WMD into orbit. And with this abstention from this vote, despite our multiple attempts to forge consensus, China has shown that it would rather defend Russia as its junior partner than safeguard the global nonproliferation regime. Colleagues, President Putin himself has said publicly that Russia has no intention of deploying nuclear weapons in space. And so today's veto begs the question, why? Why, if you are following the rules, would you not support a resolution that reaffirms them? What could you possibly be hiding? It's baffling and it's a shame. This is not the outcome the United States wanted. And given the vote count, it is not the outcome the rest of this council wanted either. But let me be clear, in no way does this vote undermine the obligations Russia or any other state party continues to have under the Outer Space Treaty. And in no way does it mark the end of our shared effort to promote safe, secure, stable, and sustainable exploration and use of outer space. For our part, the United States will continue to model transparency, accountability, and cooperation. We will continue to comply with existing arms control obligations and engage constructively in new ones. And we will continue to show up to this table and to the negotiating table in good faith and pursue bilateral arms control discussions with Russia right now without preconditions. Today's vote marks a real missed opportunity to rebuild much-needed trust in existing arms control obligations. We may be disappointed, but we remain undeterred. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States and pass the floor to Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. Japan is disappointed by the failure of the Council to adopt draft resolution S/2024/302. We deeply regret the decision of the Russian Federation to use veto to block the adoption of this historic draft resolution on weapons of mass destruction in outer space. 65 countries co-sponsored today's draft resolution. I repeat, 65. Regrettably, one permanent member decided to silence the critical message we wanted to send to the present and future people of the world. Outer space must remain a domain of peace, free of weapons of mass destruction, including the nuclear weapons. For us and for 65 countries altogether, it is hard to understand why the Council cannot be united on such a simple but significant commitment. Japan, with our co-pen holder, the United States, worked tirelessly to deliver a consensus among the Council members in a constructive and flexible manner. We incorporated comments suggested by the Council members as much as possible, particularly those proposed by the two permanent members. Despite such efforts and 5 weeks of intense consultation, Russia prevents the result we and 63 other United Nations member states wanted to achieve. Adopting this draft resolution would have been a positive and practical contribution to the promotion of peaceful use and exploration of outer space. If adopted, we could have demonstrated our unity in reaffirming the principle of no placement of any weapons of mass destruction in outer space and in opposing the development of such capabilities. Let me be clear, maintaining the peaceful nature of our outer space is greatly relevant to the work of the Security Council. With a single detonation of a nuclear weapon in outer space, a large number of satellites and other critical infrastructure in outer space would be taken down. The consequences would be catastrophic and would not be limited to outer space. The repercussions would also affect people's lives and sustainable development in every region on Earth. Despite the result today, preventing any nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction in outer space must remain our priority and should be pursued by all UN member states, including those who blocked today's draft resolution. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan and pass the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. First, allow me to extend our appreciation to Japan and to the US for their work on this important resolution. The UK voted against the proposed amendment because this resolution is rightly focused on upholding the Outer Space Treaty, something the whole international community should agree on, and not on what further measures may be needed to prevent an arms race in outer space. And anyway, the amendment offered only one perspective on that debate, a debate that is anyway conducted elsewhere, not in this Council. The UK believes that the best way to prevent an arms race in outer space is to elaborate norms, rules and principles of responsible space behaviours, which could be composed of an appropriate mix of legally binding and non-legally binding measures. The UK voted in favour of the resolution and co-sponsored it because we believe that the Security Council should send a clear message on the importance of upholding the Outer Space Treaty for international peace and security. The UK is deeply concerned about the erosion of the global international security architecture. The Outer Space Treaty is part of that architecture, in particular its Article 4, which prohibits the placement of nuclear weapons in Earth orbit. It is vital that states' space activities remain in compliance with the Outer Space Treaty and do not nudge competition into conflict, including nuclear conflict, or drive arms races, or further undermine global security norms. It remains the primary responsibility of the nuclear weapon states to avoid actions that increase the risk of nuclear conflict. In that regard, this resolution rightly recalls the joint statement of the leaders of the 5 nuclear weapon states issued on the 3rd of January 2022 on preventing nuclear war and avoiding arms races. It remains the UK's view that nuclear weapons, for as long as they exist, should serve defensive purposes, deter aggression, and prevent war and coercion. To put it simply, there should be no nuclear weapons stationed in space, and that is something every Council member should agree on. It is therefore profoundly concerning that Russia chose to veto such a resolution, which would have upheld existing international law and sought to prevent an arms race in outer space. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom and pass the floor to Algeria.
Thank you, Madam President. We commend Japan and the United States, the lead sponsors of this initiative, and for the hard work, their hard work, to improve the draft text. However, our ultimate concern is whether this initiative will truly and definitely contribute to the shared goal of the Global South of preventing an arms race and weaponization of outer space. Yet, the draft text rightly references key documents like the Space 2030 Agenda and the NPT. We appreciate its emphasis on international law and the role of the Conference on Disarmament in negotiating multilateral agreements. Algeria believes this effort should complement existing initiatives and pave the way for a legally binding treaty on preventing a comprehensive arms race in outer space. While existing forums play a role in promoting the peaceful, we believe that the Russian amendment strengthened the text by advocating for a broader approach that goes beyond just weapons of mass destruction. The threat of an arms race in space and its dire consequences for global peace and security cannot be ignored. That's why Algeria voted in favor of both the amendment and the resolution as a whole. All nations must take responsibility and avoid actions that jeopardize our shared goal of keeping space weapon-free. Transparency, trust building, and cooperation are crucial, especially involving countries with major space capability. Outer space, belonging to all humankind, should be explored and used collaboratively for the benefit of all, regardless of development level. While existing forums play a role in promoting the peaceful use of space, they cannot replace a robust international legal framework. A legally binding treaty on preventing an arms race in outer space is essential. The Conference of Disarmament, the dedicated organ for disarmament negotiations, must begin work on an international instrument for space-related issues without delay. Algeria reiterates its commitment to preventing an arms race in space. We expressed a positive vote on this resolution and on the amendment as a step towards strengthening the legal regime governing outer space activities. We urge all nations to work together to prevent this grave threat to international peace and security and build a peaceful future for all. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria and pass the floor to Ecuador.
Thank you, Madam. Ecuador voted in favor of the draft resolution put forward by Japan and the United States. We also voted in favor of the amendment put forward by China and the Russian Federation. Ecuador values and defends the exclusively peaceful use of outer space and is opposed to anarchy in outer space and further to the militarization of outer space, and this includes the placement of any type of weapon. On a number of occasions and in a number of fora, Ecuador has expressed its clear position that we must not only abstain from militarizing outer space, but abstain from politicizing it. For that reason, we respectfully appeal for frank and transparent dialogue on this issue with the purpose of avoiding the possibility of an arms race in outer space and in order to keep it from becoming another stage for confrontation. I reaffirm the strong commitment of my country that we must urgently make progress on negotiating legally binding instruments needed to preserve the peaceful nature of outer space. In conclusion, once again, we welcome the initiative and the efforts of the drafters, and we regret that this Council was unable to adopt this draft resolution, which had the overwhelming support of the majority of its members due to the unjustified use of the veto. Thank you.
Pass the floor to Switzerland.
Madam President, ensuring the peaceful, safe and sustainable use of outer space contributes to our security and prosperity. It is in the common interest of all states. Any threat in this sensitive field can have major consequences for international peace and security. Preserving space to enable future generations to take full advantage of the opportunities it offers is therefore the responsibility not only of the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space and bodies designated by the first special session on disarmament, but also of this Council. For these reasons, Switzerland voted in favor of this resolution. We have long been confronted with different approaches to space security, and Switzerland has always insisted that these are complementary. Switzerland remains committed to its position on the prohibition of the placement of weapons, including conventional weapons, in space, and supports the development of a legally binding instrument to this effect. In this regard, this resolution is a step in the right direction. My delegation appreciates the transparency and inclusiveness shown by Japan and the United States during the negotiations, and the fact that many of our considerations were taken into account. The flexibility they showed and the compromises that they made motivated Switzerland to support the proposal as presented by the co-pen holders. We regret that the resolution could not be adopted following the use of the veto by a permanent member, and it is appropriate for this Council to address the issue of space security. The resolution contained important elements in view of the tense international context: the reaffirmation of existing obligations, the assertion that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought, and the prescription of the development of systems specifically designed to be placed in space would have represented important confidence-building measures. Switzerland stresses that despite today's veto, the implementation of the relevant provisions of the UN Outer Space Treaty remain binding, and we call on all states that have not yet done so to accede to this treaty. It is essential to guarantee stability and security in outer space. Switzerland remains ready to address these challenges in the appropriate fora, including in this Council. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Switzerland and pass the floor to the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. The Republic of Korea voted in favor of the resolution because we believe that the resolution is both timely and necessary. With the event With the advent of a new space era, we have become increasingly dependent on space assets. And any action that hinders peaceful uses of outer space can have far-reaching impact. In particular, a nuclear detonation in space would have a devastating, irreversible impact and can deny everyone's right to safe, secure, and sustainable uses of our outer space. We therefore welcome this resolution, reaffirming our existing obligations under the Outer Space Treaty, and also call on member states that have not yet done so to join this important treaty. At the same time, we understand there is a genuine necessity to further develop rules, norms, and principles in space domain in order to address all space threats. We believe this point is well elaborated in the operative paragraph 3 in a balanced manner, and we don't see the need to include an additional paragraph as China and Russia proposed. We regret that once again a crucial and timely resolution was not adopted due to the veto by a permanent council member. The security landscape is becoming increasingly complex due to the challenges in new domains such as outer space and cyberspace and emerging technologies including artificial intelligence. This resolution could have been a meaningful step for the Council to address these new trends and their implications in the context of the maintenance of international peace and security. The Republic of Korea believes that such effort should continue and stands ready to work with other Council members in this endeavor. I thank you, Madam President.
The representative of the Republic of Korea and pass the floor to Slovenia.
Madam President, we thank the co-sponsors, United States and Japan, for their efforts in leading this process. We deeply regret the use of the veto by the Russian Federation. This is a missed opportunity to reinforce global security by preventing the potential weaponization of outer space. Slovenia engaged in good faith in the negotiations of this resolution with the aim to ensure a safe and secure space environment and peaceful use of outer space. We voted in favor of the resolution because it emphasizes the key role of the United Nations and underscores the importance of international space law, namely the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, as the cornerstone of international legal regime governing outer space activities in the common interest of the humankind. In other words, Madam President, this resolution embodies effective multilateralism in the Earth and in the outer space. The peaceful use and exploration of outer space extend beyond scientific endeavors. They stand for a pinnacle of aspirations and humanity's imagination. More and more our lives depend on the use of space-based technology, whether using satellites for navigation, forecasting weather, monitoring biodiversity, tracking deforestation, managing natural resources, mitigating climate change, or keeping in touch with family and friends online. Considering the benefits it brings and hopefully will continue to bring to society, it is vital that it remains the province of all humankind and is preserved for peaceful purposes. We particularly stress the importance of peaceful exploration and use of outer space for us today and for the future generations, for the benefit of all humankind. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia and pass the floor to Guyana.
Thank you, Madam President. Guyana voted in favor of the draft resolution presented by the United States and Japan. We thank the penholders for their efforts on this important text and the transparency with which the consultations were conducted. We also supported the amendment proposed by the Russian Federation and China, consistent with our position on General Assembly Resolution 78/238. In our view, both texts sought to promote the peaceful use of outer space and prevent the placement of weapons there, in line with international law, including the Outer Space Treaty and the purposes and principles of the UN as outlined in the Charter. Guyana recognizes that the placement of weapons in outer space could have adverse impacts on the entire planet and therefore supported the proposals tabled today. We are of the view that the draft resolution that was just vetoed and with the amendment presented by China and the Russian Federation could have contributed to averting such a situation. We also believe that the draft proposals could have complemented the ongoing processes within other UN fora. Madam President, Guyana underscores that outer space is the common heritage of humankind and should be used for the benefit of all humanity. This domain should therefore be used strictly for peaceful purposes with no negative consequences. To this end, we reiterate the importance of nuclear weapon states upholding their international obligations and committing to not place nuclear weapons in outer space. As we move forward in our consideration of this topic, Guyana is committed to supporting efforts that guarantee the right of all countries to benefit equitably from the peaceful use of outer space. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana and pass the floor to Sierra Leone.
Madam President, we thank the United States and Japan for the immense work invested in drafting the resolution and the negotiations thereof. Sierra Leone voted in favor of the draft resolution on weapons of mass destruction in outer space, S/2024/302, because we believe in the importance of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and the Outer Space Treaty in maintaining a peaceful and secure environment in outer space. Sierra Leone recognizes the severe consequences of using WMDs in outer space, which could have detrimental effects on the long-term sustainability of outer space activities and hinder progress towards sustainable development on Earth. We therefore urge all states to prioritize the peaceful exploration and use of outer space for the benefit of all humanity. It is in this vein that Sierra Leone further urges all member states to conduct their outer space activities in compliance with international law and the UN Charter, emphasizing the importance of maintaining international peace and security through cooperation and understanding. We also voted in favor of the amendment S/2024/323 to the draft resolution S/2024/202 because Sierra Leone supports the call for further measures, including political commitments and legally binding instruments to prevent an arms race in and militarization of outer space, and further emphasize the need for effective verification mechanisms. In ensuring that we maintain a practice of consistency, our vote for the amendment S/2024/323 is reflective of our vote in the General Assembly for Resolution A/RES/78/238, components of which form the amendments to the draft WMD resolution S/2024/302. We close by stating that it is our sincere hope that the members of the Security Council can come together and find a common ground on the issue of non-proliferation of weapons in outer space. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone and pass the floor to the Russian Federation.
Madam President, unfortunately, the UN Security Council today did not manage to adopt a well-thought-through decision on using outer space exclusively for peaceful purposes. That was the thrust of the Russian and Chinese amendment, which was not adopted. It's very telling that neither in today's discussion nor earlier did the authors of the DR answer the question, what do they not like about our proposal? Which boils down to introducing a call not to place weapons of any kind in outer space. In other words, repeating my earlier metaphor, why do we need a roof if we haven't yet built the walls? What is the real, genuine reason that prompted them to submit to the Security Council such a strange draft resolution? It remains a mystery for many colleagues. Let's try to answer that question. The PR, when reading her pre-prepared speech, basically gave away the reason. She directly confirmed that the only reason why Washington introduced this amendment is to tarnish the Russian Federation. If the US is really so much in favor of using outer space for peaceful purposes, why did you vote against our amendment calling for a ban on weapons of any kind being placed in space, not just WMDs? Your silence on this matter is more telling than anything you could possibly say. The US is lecturing other states about the use of WMDs. That's rich. The PR asked us why. Why? And we answered it. We want a ban on the placement of weapons of any kind in outer space, not just WMDs. But you don't want that. And let me ask you that very same question. Why? My US colleague, by the way, told us about her trip to Japan, including Nagasaki, and about the terrible consequences of nuclear bombings. Could I be so bold as to ask, could you enlighten us? Who conducted that nuclear bombing? The only time this was done in the history of humanity. Or perhaps our Japanese colleague can tell us all about it. A country which, as far as I recall, has never actually named the country which bombed it, as if those nuclear bombs which were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki actually landed on Japan from outer space, out of nowhere. The US PR just said that President Putin has said on numerous occasions that the Russian Federation does not have any plans to place WMDs in outer space. She also said that not adopting this resolution has no impact on Russia's existing obligation not to place WMDs in outer space as per the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. But could Ms. Thomas Greenfield, tell us why the US and Japan why did they submit this DR in the first place if it has no impact? Should we be introducing further such DRs in light of what your president said? It all becomes clear, or at least much of it, if we recall that the US and their allies announced some time ago plans to place weapons, including strike combat systems, in outer space. The use of force or threat of force in outer space, from space against Earth or from Earth against objects in outer space. This was directly mentioned in a number of space strategies of Western states. They're available, publicly available. Over the last few years, the US actively spoke out against any initiative geared towards Paros. A shining example is the fact that the US has been blocking for many years now a Russian-Chinese proposal on a treaty on the prevention of the placement of weapons in outer space, which was authored all the way back in 2008. The Russian Federation, and relevant experts are well aware of this, has pursued a completely opposite, a very constructive policy line. In various fora, in the First Committee of the General Assembly, at the Conference on Disarmament, in the Disarmament Commission, in COPUOS, the Russian Federation has been promoting initiatives geared towards preventing an arms race in outer space. For the record, I would like to state again, we're prepared to sign an international legally binding agreement. We could even do it tomorrow. An agreement which would contain a comprehensive ban on the placement of weapons of any kind, not just WMDs, in outer space, which are already, these WMDs are already prohibited by the Outer Space Treaty. We're also in favor on banning the use of force or the threat of the use of force in outer space, from space against Earth or from Earth against objects in outer space. The problem is that our Western partners won't agree to this. They are, in fact, actively, militarily exploring outer space. And lest they pull the wool over our eyes, let me state it for the record, they will not issue the militarization of outer space. The US delegation today proposed a DR without due regard for the Russian-Chinese proposal. This is just a politicized product, propaganda, which has nothing to do with keeping outer space for peaceful purposes. In doing so, Washington is clumsily trying to shirk criticism, shifting blame. Furthermore, it's a very convenient way of diverting attention from Washington's shameful veto on Palestine's attempt to achieve full membership, which meant that they couldn't fix this historical injustice against the Palestinian people. We shouldn't forget another very dangerous and nefarious component of the American draft. It's a clear attempt to use the Security Council to implement restrictions which haven't been set forth before anywhere, including the Outer Space Treaty. This sets a very serious legal precedent. The Security Council is not the place to do that. Discussions on outer space and decisions on this should be comprehensive. They should incorporate all members of the UN. They should be focused on preventing PAROS and the rise of armed conflicts in outer space. Otherwise, this is clearly a blatant attempt to impose the opinion of one Security Council member on all other UN members of the Security Council and the rest of the UN. And in fact, the maintenance of international peace and security remains the prerogative of the UN Security Council. The Russian Federation remains duty-bound to the obligations it undertook under international law in outer space, playing along with aggressive plans, giving the green light to politicized initiatives. We won't engage in that. If Security Council members from Western countries have been pounding their chests, talking about the fact that they're committed to keeping outer space peaceful, if they're prepared to reaffirm this, not in word, but in deed, we're prepared to give them another chance. That is why we'll be submitting shortly an alternative draft resolution to the Security Council. We will begin negotiations thereon as well. We hope that all Security Council members will exercise common sense and will show their interest in the need to keep outer space peaceful. Hopefully this will override attempts to politicize such an important topic, important for planet Earth as a whole.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation and pass the floor to China.
President, the first artificial satellite was launched by mankind 67 years ago, which marks the start of a long journey in the exploration and use of outer space. Today, outer space has become a global commons, where the interests of all countries are intertwined with a common stake, ensuring that outer space is used for peaceful purposes, preventing the weaponization of and an arms race in outer space, and avoiding the outer space turning into a new battlefield, has become the strong call and shared consensus of the international community. Over the past decades, the international community has made unremitting efforts to realize the aforementioned goals by formulating international legal instruments such as the Outer Space Treaty, adopting a number of GA resolutions on outer space security, and conducting extensive technical discussions under the framework of the CD, the DC, the First Committee of the General Assembly, COPIOS, the GGE, and Open-Ended Working Group on Outer Space Security, among others. During relevant deliberating processes, it has been generally recognized that current security threats to outer space include both the possible placement of weapons of mass destruction, including nuclear weapons, and other types of weapons in outer space. Also, a certain country has defined outer space as a theater of war, accelerating its buildup of military forces in outer space and creating military alliances in outer space. In the context of all these threats, only by opposing loud and clear an arms race in outer space and promoting the negotiation and conclusion of a new legal instrument on arms control in outer space can we then effectively sustain security in outer space. This is the universal call of the vast majority of member states, especially developing countries. President, as Council members work together to advance outer space security governance, efforts should be made to demonstrate goodwill, enhance mutual trust, and promote cooperation, instead of suspecting, criticizing, and blaming each other, or stoking confrontation. the main sponsors should value and take on board reasonable suggestions made by other Council members so as to facilitate a consensus on the draft resolution. Rushing the Council into taking action when the parties clearly remain divided will only lead to a divided Council, undermine the Council's authority, and compromise the mutual trust and cooperation among the parties on outer space security. To make the draft text more complete, comprehensive, and balanced, China, together with Russia, tabled an amendment to the text. Regrettably, the amendment was not adopted. The draft resolution that was just voted on is incomplete and unbalanced and does not reflect to the fullest extent the common interests and the shared call of the 193 member states on the issue of outer space security. Therefore, China had to abstain from the vote on the draft resolution. Just now, the U.S. representative made an groundless accusation against China. We firmly oppose such an attack. I would like to emphasize that if the U.S. and Japan were truly committed to advance the Council's constructive deliberations on outer space security, then they should focus squarely on the risks of outer space being weaponized and potential arms race in outer space, and they should unequivocally stand for the prohibition of the placement of all types of weapons, including nuclear weapons, in outer space. The U.S. should stop its development and deployment of offensive weapons in outer space. President, outer space is not the private property of a few countries, but the common asset of all mankind. It is not an arena for countries to fight each other, but a new frontier for mutually beneficial cooperation. The international community needs to act on the vision of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security, pursue cooperation in outer space on the basis of equality, mutual benefit, openness, and inclusivity, and ensure that the right of all countries to the peaceful exploration and use of outer space is fully guaranteed, with a view to building a community with a shared future for mankind in the field of outer space. At the same time, continued efforts should be made to prevent the weaponization of and an arms race in outer space. Start without delay negotiations on an international legal instruments on arms control in outer space, and ensure that outer space is a peaceful space that can be used for the benefit of all member states and all mankind. In this regard, major space technology countries should play a leading and exemplary role. Let me reiterate that China has always been committed to the peaceful use of outer space and has been cooperating extensively with the international community. China will continue to work hand in hand with other countries to promote the peaceful uses of outer space for the sake of global economic development and social progress, thus making greater contributions to the building of a community with a shared future for mankind. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China. I shall now make a statement in my national capacity. I start by thanking the United States and Japan for this initiative. We appreciate their skillful leadership and their tireless efforts to accommodate the positions of all Council members. Unfortunately, these efforts face yet another veto by a permanent member of this Council. The Council missed a timely opportunity to adopt its first resolution on outer space. As space capabilities continue to increase, it is the duty of this Council to address these threats to international peace and security. This resolution represented an important step in our efforts to maintain international peace and security. With it, the Council could have affirmed its commitment to ensuring that outer space remains a peaceful domain for the benefit of all humankind. We also stressed that the resolution did not prejudice in any way current discussions on the topic in the General Assembly, including in the First Committee, as well as the Conference on Disarmament. In conclusion, Malta reaffirms its principled position against all nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction, not only those deployed in outer space. These weapons threaten our existence and should be eliminated altogether. I thank you. I shall now resume my function as President of the Council. There are no more names inscribed in the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.